The first time I saw a human, they winked at me. I don't mean some absent-minded blink or nervous twitch. No, this was deliberate. A single eye closed, paired with a subtle curve of the mouth that carried layers of meaning I couldn't untangle. Was it a greeting? A challenge? Some cryptic ritual? I stood frozen, my 3 hearts pounding with a discomfort I hadn't felt since my academy days. I'd been trained as an envoy of the Grand Concordance Union, tasked with greeting new species with all the precision and protocol a galactic diplomat could muster. But nothing in my preparation mentioned this. The human responsible, Captain Ilara Knox, stood there in her dark uniform, posture loose but confident, like someone used to storms but never cowed by them. The metal corridors of her ship smelled faintly of smoke and iron, the hum of their crude engines filling the silence between us. "Don't worry about it," she said when she saw my confusion, voice warm and infuriatingly casual. But I did worry. And so did the Union. Because that wink wasn't just a gesture, it was a message. And somewhere deep inside, I feared it meant the humans knew something the rest of US didn't. The following weeks felt like being swept into the heart of a solar flare, blinding, disorienting, impossible to look away from. Every Union channel buzzed with dispatches about humans. They were turning up in places we'd marked as restricted, wandering into diplomatic stalemates we'd been balancing for decades, even striking casual bargains with warlords who hadn't spoken to anyone in a century. It wasn't malicious. They simply didn't seem to recognize the invisible lines the rest of the galaxy had agreed not to cross. The Union tasked me with following them, not as a friend, but as a safeguard. Keep them in check. Keep notes. Keep calm. On board the Odyssey, though, calm was impossible. The humans weren't like anyone I'd studied. Meals turned into noisy debates, their ships smelled of spice and metal, and someone was always singing off-key somewhere down the hall. They invited me to sit with them, offered strange, steaming drinks, and asked questions with a child's enthusiasm and a predator's focus. One evening, I asked Captain Knox how they managed to walk into danger smiling. She looked at me, shrugged, and smirked. "If you don't laugh at the dark," she said, "the dark wins." Then she winked. Not every species welcomed the humans with open arms. The Corthan clans muttered that they were reckless apes, too wild to be trusted with even a trade license. The Thrix Consortium dismissed them as unstable elements, unworthy of serious negotiation. But no matter what anyone called them, no one could ignore them. Because every time the galaxy wrote them off, the humans did something impossible. Take the Teryx Nebula. A mining rig had been caught in a gravity storm there for nearly a decade. Entire rescue fleets had failed, their ships torn apart by the swirling anomalies. The Union marked it unrecoverable. The humans didn't. I watched from a cramped jump seat as Captain Knox and her ragged crew plunged the Odyssey straight into that storm. The hull screamed, stars bent like liquid, and I swore I saw time stutter. And yet, they pressed on, laughing, as if the sheer absurdity of survival made it more likely. When they dragged that mining rig out, the Corthans called it statistical luck. The Thrix sneered about primitive stubbornness. But I'd been there. It wasn't luck. It was the humans, and whatever strange, defiant fire burned in them when the universe told them no. The wink returned when the war began. It started with the Dravari Empire, predators draped in obsidian armor, their fleets moving like shadows across the stars. They declared the humans unsanctioned expansionists, a polite term for easy prey, and struck without warning. Colonies burned. Civilian freighters vanished. Every human world trembled. The Union held meetings, drafted statements, and debated in endless circles about proportional responses and resource viability. But war moves faster than bureaucracy. I watched as the news reached Captain Knox, images of shattered ships, voices crackling with panic over comms, lists of names that ended in silence. For the first time, I saw her still. Not laughing, not smirking, just still. Then she looked at the star map, her fingers tracing routes like a painter planning a masterpiece. Her crew waited, tense, unsure if they were about to retreat or retaliate. She turned to me at last. And then, deliberate as the first day we met, she winked. But this time, it wasn't playful. It was steel wrapped in light, a wordless promise sharper than any blade. "We're not finished." And in that moment, I realized the Dravari hadn't started a war. They had woken something they couldn't possibly understand. Humans don't fight like anyone else. Most species strategize with precision, calculate every move, weigh every cost before a single shot is fired. Humans, they improvise. They bend their own rules until they snap, and somehow, that's when they're at their best. I saw cargo freighters stripped and rebuilt into warships overnight, their patched hulls an insult to engineering and yet somehow effective. I saw them weld ancient tech to modern weapons just to see if it would work. And it did, more often than reason allowed. But it wasn't just their tools. It was their minds. They laughed in the middle of firefights, cracked jokes over open comms as if humor itself were a weapon. They mocked the Dravari mercilessly, taunts so sharp that intercepted transmissions were tangled knots of rage and confusion. Nox led the charge with an audacity that felt less like command and more like a dare. Volunteers lined up for missions no one should have survived, calling them adventures, not suicides. The Dravari called them insane. The Union called them unpredictable. But I saw something else every time they charged into the impossible and came back grinning. I saw hope, wild, reckless, contagious hope. It all came to the Siege of Veyra. The Dravari gathered everything they had, a wall of ships so vast it swallowed the starlight, blotting out entire constellations. Their fleet hung above Veyra like a storm waiting to break, and every other species held its breath. The Union debated again, their voices thin and brittle over secure channels. Too costly, they said. Too risky. Too late. But the humans didn't wait for permission. Their fleet wasn't pretty. It was a patchwork of scavenged cruisers, scarred frigates, and freighters turned into blunt instruments of war. They weren't uniform, weren't orderly, but they were there. I stood beside Nox on the bridge of the Odyssey, the deck vibrating as the human fleet formed up. Outside, the Dravari armada stretched across the void, a tide of black metal. Nox stared at it, eyes alight with something fierce and unyielding. Then she turned to me, the smallest smile tugging at her lips. She winked. "Ready?" she asked, voice steady as if we weren't staring at the edge of annihilation. I didn't know if she meant the battle, the war, or something bigger. But I found myself nodding. And then, without hesitation, the humans charged. The galaxy will argue forever about who truly won the Siege of Veyra. The Dravari retreated, their armada shattered and limping into the void. The Union finally intervened, sweeping in with treaties and relief fleets once the danger had passed. History will frame it as a collective effort, a joint victory. But I was there. I saw the way the human ships led the charge, their hulls scarred and smoking, still pressing forward like they didn't understand the concept of fear. I saw the volunteers who boarded Dravari flagships with nothing but patched armor and impossible determination. And I saw the Dravari falter, not because they'd been outgunned, but because they'd been outmatched by something they couldn't name. When the dust settled, I found Nox on the Odyssey's bridge, leaning against a console, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. I asked her, finally, what the wink meant, the one that had haunted every moment since we met. She smiled, tired and bright all at once. "It means," she said, "we're in on the joke." And as I looked out at the bruised, healing stars, I understood. Because sometimes, when the void stares too long, there's only one answer. You wink back.